I still remember the smell of the rain that morning, heavy, like it carried the weight of something that hadn't been said yet. You ever wake up with that feeling that something in your life quietly snapped overnight, but you just don't know what it is yet? That's what it felt like the day I found the letter. I was sitting at the kitchen table, same as always, drinking coffee that had gone cold, staring at the framed picture of my wife, Diane, on the counter. 20 years of marriage in that photo, her hand on my shoulder, both of us pretending we were still happy. She had that practiced smile she used when people were watching. The kind that said, "We're fine," even when we were miles from fine. Our son Jamie was 18 when he passed. That's the part I still can't say without feeling my throat tighten. They called it an accident, a late-night crash on a rain-slick road. He was driving home from his friend's house. That's what the police report said. But if you've lived long enough, you know how truth sometimes wears a disguise. After Jamie's funeral, Diane changed. Not just in the way grief changes people, I mean completely. She stopped crying. She stopped talking about him. She started wearing new clothes, buying expensive perfume, and spending hours on the phone, whispering in the laundry room when she thought I couldn't hear. I told myself people grieve differently. I told myself to be patient. But then, 3 weeks after the funeral, an envelope arrived. It was thick, official-looking, addressed to Mrs. Diane Keller, and that's how I found out about the insurance. $800,000. Filed 2 days before Jamie's death. Now, I'm not a man who believes in coincidences, especially not when my wife, who had been complaining for months about our financial strain, suddenly gets an insurance payout that big right after our only son dies. But I didn't confront her that day. I wanted to see what she would do, and what she did was move the money. Within a week, she opened a private account under her maiden name. Then she started visiting a man I didn't know. A financial advisor, she said. He drove a black Mercedes and wore cufflinks shaped like tiny skulls. I only saw them together once, outside a cafe, but the way she leaned across the table toward him, laughing like a teenager, it wasn't business. It was something else. That night, I sat in my truck in the driveway for nearly an hour thinking about Jamie's smile. The way he used to toss me his baseball glove after every game, like he couldn't wait to tell me everything that happened. And then I remembered something he said a few days before he died, something I didn't understand at the time. "Dad," he said, "if something ever happens to me, check the lockbox." I thought he was joking. Now I wasn't so sure. The lockbox wasn't in his room. I tore through every drawer, checked his closet, even the attic. Nothing. But Jamie wasn't careless. He was the kind of kid who labeled everything. If he said lockbox, then it existed. Somewhere. 2 nights later, when Diane was asleep, I found it, hidden behind the water heater in the basement, a small, fireproof safe, no bigger than a shoebox. It had scratches along the edge, like someone tried to open it and gave up. Maybe that someone was Diane. I stared at it for a long time before I touched it. My hands were shaking. You ever get that gut feeling? Like the moment right before you open a door and you already know what's on the other side is going to change everything? That's what it felt like. It took me 3 hours to figure out the code. It wasn't his birthday. It wasn't mine. It wasn't even Diane's. It was the date of his first baseball game, when the lock clicked. I swear the room got colder. Inside was a flash drive, a few letters, and a small, broken keychain, the one I thought he'd lost months before. The first letter was addressed to me. It said, "Dad, if you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I found something about Mom and Mr. Price. Don't trust them. They said it's just business, but it's not. Keep this drive safe. It has proof." I stopped reading. My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Mr. Price. That was the man from the cafe, the one with the skull cufflinks, and Jamie had found something he thought was dangerous enough to hide. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Folders opened, videos, emails, bank statements, names I didn't recognize, and one document titled Life Insurance, Pre-Approval. My stomach dropped. The date on it was 3 weeks before the accident, and the signature was Diane's. She'd listed herself as sole beneficiary, but What caught me off guard, what made me drop the mouse, was the signature below. Hers, Jamie Keller, except it wasn't his handwriting. Not even close. The next morning, I called the insurance company, pretending to be my wife's assistant. They confirmed the policy, filed under mutual consent. The payout had been processed, deposited, and partially transferred to an investment firm under Mr. Price's name. That's when I realized my son's death wasn't an accident, and my wife wasn't grieving. She was celebrating. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I started watching her instead, the way she left the house, the time she returned, the calls she made. I even installed a small camera in her car, tucked beneath the rearview mirror. You learn a few tricks when life forces you to. 3 days later, I caught her driving to a lake house 2 towns over. I followed at a distance, headlights off. She parked outside a cabin, and when she opened the door, there he was, Mr. Price. They kissed before she even stepped inside. That was the moment something in me went quiet. Not angry, not broken, just quiet. The kind of silence that sits deep in your bones when you finally stop lying to yourself about who someone really is. I drove home that night without saying a word. I poured myself a drink, sat in the dark, and stared at the flash drive. Jamie tried to warn me. He tried to stop her, and she killed him for it. You ever sit so still you can hear your own heartbeat? That was me the next morning. Coffee untouched, laptop open, Jamie's flash drive glowing faintly in the dark like it was alive. I kept replaying his voice in my head. Don't trust them, Dad. I stared at the names on those files until the sun came up. There were transactions between Diane, Mr. Price, and a company I'd never heard of, Orion Mutual Holdings. Offshore accounts, shell transfers, stuff way beyond the reach of a small-town guy like me. But Jamie, he'd figured it out before me. My son had uncovered their entire scheme, and it cost him his life. I looked at his picture on the mantel, that same grin he had since Little League, the kind of grin that made people root for him. And I said out loud, I'm sorry, kid. I should have seen it. That day I made myself a promise. I wouldn't go to the cops. Not yet. I didn't want Diane in a courtroom. I wanted her to see me, to know I knew, and to watch the fear crawl across her face. So I started small, subtle. I left things around the house. Jamie's baseball glove on the counter, his old phone on the dining table, the kind of stuff she'd tucked away when he died. As if erasing him made her richer, she noticed. By day 3, she looked spooked. She dropped a glass when she saw Jamie's jacket hanging on the back of a chair. I just shrugged and said, "Found it in the attic?" She didn't say a word. That night, she barely touched her dinner. She kept glancing at me like she was waiting for me to ask about the money, the man, the lie. But I didn't. I just smiled. The same calm smile I used to give her when Jamie was little, and she'd overcook the roast. She didn't know yet that the game had started. I spent the next week tracking every move she made. Her car GPS showed trips to that same lake house. Sometimes she'd leave her phone behind. Smart, but not smart enough. I found the spare keys, drove there myself one afternoon when I knew she was gone, and broke in through the back. The cabin smelled like cigar smoke and cheap perfume. There were wine glasses still half full, a silk scarf on the couch, and, on the counter, a single photo. Diane, Mr. Price, and Jamie. It looked old, maybe taken a year before he died. The caption on the back read, "Family investments start early." That's when it hit me. Jamie wasn't supposed to die. He was supposed to sign off. They needed his consent to cash in the policy. But when he found out what they were doing, he refused, so they made sure he couldn't say no. You know what's funny about being an old man? People forget you were ever dangerous. They see wrinkles, not instincts. But I hadn't lost mine. I took that photo, scanned it, and put it back exactly where I found it. Then I went home and printed a copy. The next morning, I left it under Diane's coffee cup and face down. She walked into the kitchen, still half asleep, muttering something about her meeting. Then she lifted the cup and froze. Her face went pale. "Where did you get this?" she asked, voice cracking just enough for me to notice. I looked at her for a long moment and said quietly, "Jamie wanted me to see it." She stared at me, lips parting slightly, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Then she laughed. That fake laugh she used when she couldn't think of a lie fast enough. Oh, don't be dramatic. It was a business event. You know how kids are, they love to tag along. I just nodded, took a sip of my coffee, and said, "Sure, business." Her hands trembled. She left early that morning. That night, I drove out to the lake house again, this time with a plan. I'd installed a tiny tracker under her car last week. It wasn't much, an old mechanic's trick, but it told me she'd be there by 8 p.m. I parked half a mile away, waited in the dark, engine off. The wind carried voices, laughter, two of them. Hers and his. Then I heard something else, a third voice, a man I didn't recognize. He said, "It's done. The transfers are final." They were still moving money. Even after Jamie, even after everything, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked up to that cabin, slow, deliberate, each step quieter than the last. The porch light was off, but the window was cracked open just enough to hear. "Diane," Price said, "once this clears, we're out." "Cayman accounts don't leave trails," my wife laughed softly. "Good. I've had enough of pretending to grieve." My hand tightened around the edge of the window frame. The wood cracked. That sound must have given me away because she turned. "Did you hear that?" I stepped into the doorway. "Yeah," I said, voice calm. I did. For a second, no one moved. Price stood up, hand drifting toward his coat. Diane just stared at me, eyes wide, face draining of color. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. I smiled. "Neither should Jamie, but that didn't stop you, did it?" Price stepped forward, trying to sound in control. "Why don't we all calm down?" "Don't," I said, raising a hand. "You don't get to use that voice. I've heard your type before. You think money makes you bulletproof, but all it does is make you stupid." Diane started crying. I didn't buy it. "You don't understand," she said. "It was supposed to be different." We didn't mean—" "Save it," I cut in. "He trusted you." She reached out, maybe to touch me, maybe to plead, but I stepped back. "You killed our son for $800,000, and you thought you could just start over?" No one spoke. Only the sound of the wind outside, slipping through the cracks in that rotten cabin. Then I pulled out my phone and turned the screen toward them. The camera light blinked red. "Smile," I said. "You're on video." Their faces froze. That was the first step of my revenge. Not to hurt them yet, but to make them feel seen. I left that cabin without another word. By the time I got home, I'd already uploaded the footage to 3 cloud drives and sent a copy to a lawyer friend of mine, one who owed me more than a few favors. But deep down, I knew this was far from over, because Diane wasn't going to sit quietly, and I wasn't done watching her burn. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Diane's fake tears, Price's smug calm. I could still hear the soft click of my phone camera echoing in that cabin. You'd think revenge would bring peace, but all it brought was silence, the kind that hums in your ears when your world's been turned inside out. By morning, I was still at the kitchen table. The house felt hollow. Jamie's picture stared back at me from the wall, that easy smile that used to light the room. "I've got it handled, kid," I whispered. One step at a time. Around 9 a.m., I got the call I knew was coming. "Mr. Harrison?" The voice was cold, official. "This is Detective Miles from County Police. We received a complaint. Says you were trespassing on private property last night." "Brandishing threats," I almost laughed. "Let me guess." "Diane Price?" Silence. Then, "We'd like you to come down and clear a few things up." I agreed. Calmly, because I had nothing to hide. And they had no idea what I was holding. The precinct smelled like old coffee and wet paper. Detective Miles was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, too eager to show authority. He slid a folder across the desk. "Your wife's made some serious accusations. Claims you've been harassing her since your son's death. Leaving unsettling items around the house. She called it harassment when I find my son's old things." I asked. He shrugged. "She also says you've been showing up uninvited, recording her." I leaned back. "You mean the night she and her lover discussed laundering $800,000 of life insurance?" "Yeah, I recorded that. That got his attention." "You have proof?" I slid a small USB across the table. "Start there." He plugged it in, played 15 seconds, and froze. Diane's voice came through the tinny speakers. "I've had enough of pretending to grieve." His eyes flicked up at me. "You realize this changes everything." "Yeah," I said quietly. "That's why I came." For the first time since Jamie's death, I felt something close to control again. But life has a cruel sense of timing. That same afternoon as I drove home, I saw 2 cars parked outside my gate. Reporters. Somehow, someone leaked the harassment part before the truth got out. By the time I reached my porch, there were already cameras flashing. "Mr. Harrison, did you threaten your wife? Is it true your son left you nothing? Are you angry she moved on?" I didn't answer. I just went inside, locked the door, and sat in the dark. It was all too familiar, the way lies spread faster than facts. But I'd been underestimated my whole life. I wasn't going to let Diane rewrite Jamie's story into some pathetic tabloid tragedy. That night, I uploaded everything. The video, the financial statements, the insurance records, all to OneDrive. Then I called the only person I trusted, my old friend Paul, a retired journalist who still had strings to pull. "Jesus, Frank," he said when he saw the footage. This is huge. If this is real, it's real," I interrupted. "I don't want sympathy. I want exposure." "Full story?" "All of it," he hesitated. "They'll come after you hard." "You sure you're ready for that?" I looked straight into his tired eyes. "They already killed my son. What more can they take?" He nodded slowly. "Then we'll do it right." The next day, the article dropped. "Wife, financial advisor under investigation for insurance fraud, after son's death." My house phone rang nonstop. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years called to check in. Reporters camped outside again, but this time, the questions were different, sharper, hungrier. Diane tried to play the victim on social media, called it all grief-fueled delusion. But screenshots of the wire transfers surfaced within hours. Then the bank records? One of Price's employees leaked the Cayman documents anonymously. I didn't even have to lift a finger. The truth did the work, and yet, in the middle of the storm, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. Because justice on paper doesn't fill an empty chair at the dinner table. It doesn't laugh at your bad jokes. It doesn't hug you after a long day. But there was one thing it did do. It made sure Jamie's name wasn't buried under their lies. A week later, Detective Miles called again. "We've arrested both of them," he said. "We found offshore accounts, a shared property deed, and evidence they falsified medical reports. You were right, about everything." For a long moment I didn't say a word. Then I asked, "You think they'll confess?" He sighed. "Price already lawyered up. Your wife, she's blaming him for everything." Of course she was. Diane always found someone else to carry her guilt. That night I went to Jamie's grave for the first time in months. I brought 2 things, his baseball glove and the flash drive that started it all. I buried the drive beneath the headstone next to the glove and whispered, "You did it, kid. You brought them down." The wind picked up, cold and sharp, but I swear for a moment it carried his voice, faint, soft, almost teasing. "Took you long enough, old man." I smiled. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Guess I'm not as quick as I used to be." But just when I thought it was over, it wasn't. Because 2 days later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a note, printed, not handwritten. "You don't know everything about Jamie. Stop digging or you'll regret it." No signature. No clue who sent it. But the postmark? Cayman Islands, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about my son's death felt incomplete. That note sat on my desk like a loaded gun. Cayman Islands, the same place Price had hidden the insurance money. At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe some desperate attempt from one of their lawyers to rattle me. But the longer I stared at that white envelope, the more I felt it. That pulse in my chest, the same one I'd felt the day Jamie died. The kind that tells you something isn't done yet. I spent the next 2 days digging through every file I'd already gathered. I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I was looking for a pattern. Jamie's life insurance, his savings, his emails. Every document, every receipt, every scrap of his life that I still had. And then I found it. A single transfer dated 6 weeks before his accident. $25,000, wired from his account to someone named T. Rivera. The memo line said consulting fee. I didn't know any Rivera. But the bank address was in the Caymans. I picked up the phone and called Detective Miles. "Rivera mean anything to you?" He paused. "Yeah, Terry Rivera. Works or worked for Price's firm. Disappeared right after the investigation started. Think she sent me the letter?" Could be, he said. Or someone who doesn't want you to find her. That night, I couldn't shake it. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker across Jamie's old car, still parked where he left it the last time he came by. The smell of his cologne still lingered faintly inside. I started talking to him again. I did that sometimes, when the silence got too heavy. Kid, what the hell were you into? I whispered. What were you hiding from me? I knew I had to go to the Caymans. I knew it was reckless. But when you've already lost everything, risk doesn't scare you anymore. 3 weeks later, I stepped off a plane into thick, humid air that smelled like salt and rain. The Cayman Islands weren't the paradise people dream about, not when you're chasing ghosts. I'd arranged to meet a local investigator named Marius, an old contact of Paul's. He was tall, quiet, and had that kind of patience you only see in men who've seen too much. "You're the American?" he said when we met near the pier. "Yeah, looking for a woman named Rivera." He raised an eyebrow. "You and half the island. She's gone dark. Word is she kept records, Price's offshore books. Someone's paying to keep them buried. I asked him to take me where she'd last been seen. A small cafe near the docks. There, a waitress recognized her photo. She used to come here," the woman said softly, always looking over her shoulder. "Last time, she said she was meeting someone. An older man, American, I think." My stomach dropped. "Did she say his name?" She shook her head. "Just said he was the one who knew the truth about the boy. Jamie." That night, back in my hotel, I went over every possibility. What truth? What did Rivera know about Jamie that I didn't? I couldn't sleep, so I went walking. Down by the beach, the sound of the waves covered my thoughts. That's when I saw a shadow break from the palms behind me. "Beautiful night for digging, Mr. Harrison." The voice was familiar, smooth, cold. "Price?" I turned slowly. He was dressed too well for the island. Linen shirt, polished shoes. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked. He smiled. "I could ask you the same. Chasing ghosts in paradise? You mean the woman who can prove you stole from my son?" "Ah," he said, amused. Still clinging to that narrative, are we? He stepped closer, his smile fading. "You really don't understand, do you? Jamie wasn't your innocent little angel. He helped us. The money, the policy, he was in on it until he tried to back out. My chest went cold. You're lying." "Am I?" "Ask Rivera. She's got the emails." Before I could respond, headlights cut through the dark. A car pulled up fast, tires spitting sand. A woman jumped out, waving frantically. "Frank!" "Get in!" It was her. "Rivera." Older than I expected, but her eyes were alive with fear. "Move!" she shouted. "They're not here to talk." Price turned, startled, just as another pair of lights appeared down the road. SUV, blacked out. "No plates." Rivera grabbed my arm, pulled me toward her car. We sped off before Price could move. She drove like someone who'd been running for years. The road blurred past, palms bending in the wind. Finally, she stopped in front of a small warehouse on the edge of town. Inside, it was lined with boxes and old equipment. She locked the door, then opened a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a small, weathered lockbox. "This," she said, "is what they killed for." She handed it to me. Inside were printouts, bank logs, offshore transfers, encrypted emails. But what caught my eye was the last document, a letter addressed to me in Jamie's handwriting. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't fix what I started." My hands trembled as I read. He wrote about how Price had convinced him to move money through shell companies for bonuses, how Diane helped forge signatures, how, when Jamie tried to come clean, Price threatened to ruin him. He'd set up the insurance policy himself, believing it was a safety net. He had no idea they planned to make him the payout. By the time I finished reading, I could barely breathe. My son hadn't been stupid. He'd been trapped. Rivera watched me quietly. "He tried to get the files to you. That's why they came after me. Price was supposed to meet me that night. I never showed. I closed the lockbox. What do we do now?" She looked out the window, her voice low. "We make sure no one ever forgets what they did to him." Outside, the SUV passed by again, slow, like a predator scenting prey. I realized then I wasn't done fighting. Not yet. Jamie's story deserved more than vengeance. It deserved the truth, laid bare for the world, and for the first time in months, I felt something stronger than grief. Purpose. Morning light hit the tin roof of the warehouse like a drumbeat. Rivera was already awake, standing by the window with a pistol half hidden in her hand. "They found us," she said simply. A shadow passed by the window, 2 men in suits, the kind who look out of place in the tropics. I could see the bulge under one's jacket. I didn't need a plan. "Just instinct. Back door?" I whispered. She nodded toward the rear. We slipped out into a narrow alley behind the warehouse, the smell of salt and oil thick in the air. My knees weren't what they used to be, but adrenaline is a hell of a thing. We ducked behind a row of old boats half covered in tarps. The men came around the corner seconds later. Rivera raised her pistol. "We don't have to kill anyone," she muttered. I pulled the lockbox closer to my chest. "We just have to make it out alive." We crawled through a gap in the fence and ran until the sound of the waves swallowed everything else. By the time we reached the beach, the sun was high, burning, relentless. Rivera stopped, breathing hard, and looked at me. "They won't stop," she said. "Price has money, connections. You can't fight him like a man. You have to bury him like a secret." "Then we bury him," I said. We went dark for 2 days. Rivera had friends, the kind who dealt in quiet favors. They got us a boat, a new set of papers, and one last chance. That night she laid the lockbox on the deck between us. "If we can get this to the U.S. Embassy," she said, "they'll protect it, maybe open a case. But once we show them what's inside, there's no turning back. You'll never have peace again." I looked out at the sea, black and endless. Peace is overrated. We made it halfway to the main island before the storm hit. Waves slammed the hull, the sky split open, and lightning turned the ocean into glass. I was gripping the tiller when I saw it. Headlights cutting through the rain behind us. A speedboat chasing fast. "They found us?" Rivera shouted. She fired once, twice, but the wind swallowed the sound. A bullet hit the railing, splintering wood inches from my arm. "Hold on!" I yelled, gunning the motor. The storm was chaos, wind, salt, and thunder. But chaos has its uses. The moment lightning struck again, I veered hard to starboard and cut the engine. The pursuing boat overshot, blinded by the rain. "Now!" Rivera shouted. We slipped behind them, using the darkness as cover. She tossed a flare into the waves, and the light drew them off course. By the time they turned back, we were gone. Hours later, we washed up near a deserted pier. I dragged the lockbox onto the dock, soaked and shaking. Rivera collapsed beside me, laughing through her exhaustion. "We're not dead," she said. "That's a start." I laughed too, a raw, ugly sound that turned into something else. Relief. When the sun rose, I walked into town with the lockbox under my arm. My clothes were still wet, my hands blistered, but I didn't care. I found a small post office, the kind that didn't ask too many questions, and sent the files, all of them, to Paul back home, with a simple note: "Tell the truth, and don't stop." Then I called Detective Miles. "You'll have everything within 48 hours, I told him. "Make sure it sees daylight." Rivera stayed behind. She didn't say goodbye, just gave a small nod. I think she knew I couldn't keep running, not at my age. My fight was ending. Hers was just beginning. By the time I boarded the flight back home, Price's empire was already cracking. I read about it 2 days later. Headlines about financial fraud, offshore accounts, missing funds. His firm was under federal investigation. And Diane? She vanished. Some said she fled the country. Some said she was cooperating. I didn't care anymore. I'd buried my son once. I wasn't going to bury his truth too. A week later, a courier delivered a sealed envelope to my door. Inside was a photograph. Rivera, standing on a quiet beach holding Jamie's letter. On the back she'd written, "He didn't die for nothing." I sat on my porch until sunset, the wind cool against my face. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted. Just hollow, but in a way that made space for light. You don't heal from something like that. You just learn to live with the echoes, and sometimes, when the evening light hits my living room just right, I still hear Jamie's laughter, somewhere in the distance, carried on the sea. That's when I realized revenge doesn't always end with a bullet or a courtroom victory. Sometimes it ends quietly, when the truth finally breathes, and the guilty have nowhere left to hide. It's strange how quiet life becomes after chaos. For weeks, the phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters, detectives, lawyers. Everyone wanted a statement, a reaction, a headline. I didn't give them any. I'd already said everything that mattered. Instead, I spent my mornings on the porch, drinking coffee from the chipped mug Jamie gave me years ago, watching the street stay ordinary. No choppers, no news vans, just neighbors walking dogs and kids biking past. Life moving on, stubbornly. Then, one morning, a letter came. No return address. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Diane's, you destroyed everything," it began, but I guess it was already broken. I thought I was saving us, keeping the dream alive. "You can hate me, but I swear I never meant for Jamie to die." He found out too much. I panicked. I'll never forgive myself. "You wanted the truth. Well, here it is." There was no signature. Just a small Polaroid taped inside. Jamie, standing beside her, smiling, both of them younger, before money and fear poisoned the air between them. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. Hate felt heavy. Forgiveness felt impossible. But grief just sat there, patient, waiting for me to finally stop fighting it. I folded the photo, slipped it into the lockbox, and buried it under the oak tree in the yard. Some things don't belong on record. Some things just belong to memory. The next day, I drove out to the cemetery for the first time since Jamie's funeral. The grass had grown wild around his grave. I trimmed it with my pocket knife, brushed away the dust on the headstone, and whispered, "It's done, son. It's all out in the open now." The wind moved through the trees, soft, almost like an answer. I placed a small seashell on the grave, one I'd kept from the night Rivera and I survived that storm. A reminder that even when the sea tries to swallow you, sometimes it spits you back out with purpose. Months passed. Price's empire crumbled in court, asset seizures, indictments, plea deals. The headlines loved the scandal, but what the papers never said was how many lives their greed ruined long before the handcuffs ever clicked. Rivera called once, months later. "It's over," she said. "They got him. He's not coming back." I asked her what she'd do next. She laughed softly. "Disappear, probably. Maybe start again where no one knows my name." "You should do the same." I told her I already had. I started fixing boats again, old battered ones people had given up on. There was something honest about it, rebuilding what was broken plank by plank. One morning, a teenage boy stopped by, asked if I could teach him how to sand the hull. He worked quietly beside me all afternoon. When he left, he turned and said, "You ever lose someone you couldn't stop thinking about?" I looked out at the horizon. "Every day," I said. "That's why I keep busy." That night, the house felt lighter somehow. I poured a glass of whiskey and sat by the window listening to the waves crash far beyond the street. My hands still ached from work, but for the first time in years, they didn't shake. I took out Jamie's old pocket knife, the same one he'd used to carve his name into our boat when he was 8, and set it on the table. He was still here, in a way. Not in the lockbox, not in the files, but in every honest thing I'd rebuilt since the truth came out. And as the moonlight slid across the table, I realized something simple and hard-earned. Closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from the moment you stop needing them. That night, before I turned in, I stepped outside and looked toward the sea. The sky was clear. The air smelled clean. I whispered into the dark, "You can rest now." "Jamie, I'll carry the rest." Then I went back inside, closed the door behind me, and for the first time since the day my son died, I slept without dreams. That was the real ending, the kind where revenge gives way to peace, and truth finally has the last word. Years have passed now. Sometimes when the light hits the sea just right, I can almost see Jamie out there, a shadow of a boy skipping stones, daring the waves to chase him back. He never does look back in those memories. He just laughs, running farther out, like the horizon belongs to him. I still live in the same house, though the walls are quieter now. The laughter that used to fill it has become a kind of echo. Not painful anymore, just tender. Like the house itself knows what it's lost, but refuses to let it be forgotten. The boat shop kept me grounded all these years. I rebuilt it from scratch, painted, repaired, reopened. People bring me wrecks for miles around, thinking they're beyond saving. I never tell them this, but that's the part I love most, watching something ruined become seaworthy again. Maybe because it mirrors what I've had to do with my own life. Diane never wrote again. Last I heard, she was living quietly somewhere in Arizona. The courts took most of what she'd stolen. The rest vanished into legal dust. I used to dream about confronting her again, about demanding one more answer, one more reason. But as time stretched, so did my perspective. Some debts aren't meant to be collected. Some peace isn't granted. It's made. And so, I let her ghost drift out to sea with the others. On Jamie's birthday every year, I take that old pocket knife of his and carve one more small mark into the pier. Not his name, just a line. There are 16 of them now, each one a year without him. Each one proof that grief doesn't fade, it just finds quieter places to rest. One afternoon last summer, that same boy I taught to sand hulls came back. Older now, stronger, with a boat of his own. He told me he was joining the Coast Guard, said he wanted to help people find their way back. I shook his hand, smiled, and for a moment I could almost hear Jamie's laugh again. Carried on the wind, the sea and I have made our peace. I still visit it every morning, watching the tide roll in and out, relentless, patient, cleansing. It took everything from me once, but it also gave me something back. The understanding that life never really ends where we think it does. There's always another tide, another sunrise, another story waiting quietly beneath the surface. So here I am, older, slower but finally still. When people ask how I survived it all, I just tell them the truth. I didn't. I changed, and maybe that's enough. Because sometimes surviving isn't about fighting back. It's about learning how to live with what remains. That's how my story ends. Not with revenge, not with loss, but with a quiet morning, the sound of the waves, and a name I still whisper into the wind, Jamie. Then I let it go.